The storm had been relentless, turning roads into rivers and homes into islands. But in the chaos, something caught his eye, a desperate struggle against the rising water. A mother dog, drenched and exhausted, clung to a half-submerged log. Beside her, a wooden crate bobbed in the flood, tiny whimpers barely audible over the raging current. Jack Dawson had sworn he'd never do this again, never run into danger, never risk everything for a life that might already be lost. But as the crate tilted, Puppies tumbling toward the water, his body moved before his mind could stop him. Would he make it in time? Or would the flood claim them all? This story will move you in ways you never imagined. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you tuning in from today? Drop a comment and be part of this journey with us. May this story bring warmth to your heart. Now let's begin. Before we dive into this heartwarming story, drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Thank you. The wind howled like a wounded animal, rattling the windows of Jack Dawson's old truck as he navigated the flooded backroads of rural Mississippi. Rain pounded the windshield in relentless sheets, the wipers struggling to keep up. Even with the headlights on high beam, visibility was near zero, just an endless, murky void of water swallowing everything in its path. Jack clenched his jaw, gripping the steering wheel tighter. He had been through storms before. As a cop, as a rescuer, he had seen disasters, pulled bodies from wreckage, dragged survivors from rising waters. He had fought against nature more times than he could count, but this was different. This time, he wasn't here to save anyone, or at least that was what he told himself. He had left that life behind. He wasn't a cop anymore, wasn't a hero. He was just a man trying to outrun his past, trying to live in the quiet solitude of a town that had already forgotten his name. Then he saw it, a shape in the water. At first, it was just another shadow in the flood, another broken fence post, another piece of someone's life washed away. But then it moved, a frantic splash, a desperate struggle against the current. Jack slowed the truck, leaning forward. The rain blurred everything, but when the next flash of lightning lit up the sky, he saw it clear as day. A dog. No, a mother dog. She was barely clinging to a floating plank, her golden fur slick with rain, paws slipping as the water fought to pull her under. And beside her, rocking violently in the flood, was a wooden crate. Jack could just make out the tiny, shivering bodies inside. Puppies. A curse slipped from his lips. He knew that look in her eyes. He had seen it before, in mothers holding on to children during house fires, in people trapped in cars, sinking into rivers. It was the look of someone who had accepted their own fate but refused to let go of those who depended on them. Jack swallowed hard, gripping the gear shift. He could keep driving. That's what the old him would have done. But the old him had died the night he let someone drown. It had been 2 years ago, in another storm, another flood. He had been the first on the scene, an overturned car sinking fast, a woman trapped inside, screaming for help. Jack had tried. God, he had tried. But the current was too strong. The rain was too heavy. By the time he reached her, the water had done what it always did. It had taken her, and Jack had never forgiven himself. The department had called it an accident. His fellow officers had told him there was nothing he could have done. But Jack had known better. He could have fought harder. He could have saved her. And now, staring at the mother dog and her pups, he knew he had a choice. Jack exhaled sharply, slamming the truck into park. He didn't hesitate. He threw open the door, the wind ripping it from his grip as the storm screamed around him. The icy floodwater hit his boots instantly, rising past his knees as he waded in. The mother dog let out a weak, trembling whimper, her eyes locking onto his. Jack knew if he didn't act now, none of them would make it out alive. The water was colder than Jack expected, freezing, biting, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones instantly. It was higher, too, rushing past his waist as he waded in, then clawing up his chest as he moved deeper. His boots became anchors, pulling him down, but he kept pushing forward, his eyes locked on the mother dog and her struggling puppies. She was barely hanging on. Her paws, clawed at the plank she was balancing on, slipping every time the water surged beneath her. The crate rocked beside her, the puppies inside crying out as waves crashed over the sides. She saw him now, her wide, frightened eyes locking onto his. She didn't trust him. He could see it in the way her body tensed, the way she flattened herself against the plank as if preparing to defend her babies. "Easy, girl," Jack called, his voice barely carrying over the wind. "I'm here to help." She didn't move. Jack gritted his teeth. He didn't have time to earn her trust. A new wave surged forward, dragging the plank farther from him, tilting the crate dangerously to one side. The mother dog barked in panic, lunging toward it, but her paws slipped and she nearly went under. Jack lunged, forcing his body through the current. His muscles burned, his legs fighting against the pull of the flood. Debris floated around him, tree branches, pieces of fences, household objects torn from homes. Then something slammed into him. The force sent him reeling, pain exploding in his side as a thick branch, jagged and splintered, smashed into his ribs. His breath hitched, his footing vanished, and suddenly he was under. Darkness, cold. The river swallowed him whole, dragging him down, rolling him like a rag doll in its grip. His lungs screamed as water filled his nose, his chest tightening in panic. He thrashed blindly, reaching for anything, but there was nothing. His head broke the surface just long enough to gasp before another wave crashed over him. He was going to drown. No, not yet. Jack forced his body upward, kicking hard. His fingers clawed at the water until, finally, they found something solid, an old fence post, still partially attached to the ground. He gripped it, coughing, spitting out floodwater as he blinked the rain from his eyes. The mother dog was still there, the plank was still floating, but the crate, it was gone. Jack's stomach lurched. He turned frantically, scanning the water. There, the crate had flipped. Tiny bodies were flailing, splashing weakly against the current. The puppies. Shit, Jack didn't think. He moved. Ignoring the pain in his ribs, he let go of the fence post and threw himself into the current, arms cutting through the water in powerful strokes. The first puppy was closest. Jack reached it in seconds, scooping it up, pressing the tiny, soaked body against his chest. It trembled, its little paws curling into his jacket. One down. He kicked toward the next one. This one was weaker, its movements slowing, eyes barely above the surface. Jack grabbed it, securing it under his arm. 2. The next was farther. The current had already carried it several yards downstream. Jack swore under his breath. He could feel his strength fading, his body already protesting the abuse, but he pushed forward. 3. The mother dog was barking, frantic, watching him but unable to do anything. There was one more. Jack's eyes darted through the water, searching. Where was it? Then a flash of gold, just beneath the surface. No. It wasn't moving. Jack surged forward, reaching, grabbing blindly into the water. His fingers brushed wet fur. He pulled. The puppy was limp, unresponsive. No, no, no. He shoved it against his chest, holding it with the others as he turned back toward the mother dog. His breath was coming in ragged gasps, his muscles screaming for relief, but he didn't stop. When he reached her, she whined, pawing at him desperately, nudging the puppies with her nose. Jack had no idea if they were all still alive. He didn't have time to check. The water was rising. The plank they were balancing on was barely floating now, sinking under their combined weight. They needed to get to higher ground. Jack scanned the area. There was a barn, half submerged, its roof just high enough to be above water. It wasn't far, maybe 20 yards. But in water like this, 20 yards might as well have been 20 miles. His ribs throbbed where the branch had hit him. His arms were lead. His legs felt like they could give out at any second. But Jack had been here before. He knew what happened when you hesitated. He wouldn't let it happen again. He tightened his grip on the puppies, secured the mother dog's soaked fur in his fingers, and took a breath. "Hold on, girl," he muttered. "We're getting out of this." And then he swam. It was the longest 20 yards of his life. The current tried to rip them away. The wind howled. The rain slashed at them like knives. Every stroke burned. Every second felt like an eternity. But slowly, inch by inch, they moved forward. 10 yards. 5. Jack's vision blurred. His strength was slipping, his lungs ached. 3, 2, his fingers scraped wood. The barn. Jack threw himself forward, dragging the mother dog with him, using every ounce of strength left to haul them onto the partially submerged roof. His arms buckled, his body collapsed. He barely managed to set the puppies down before rolling onto his back, gasping for air. The mother dog wasted no time. She nosed each of her babies, whining, licking them furiously, checking for movement. Jack turned his head, his chest still heaving, just in time to see the smallest pup, the one he had pulled from beneath the water, cough weakly. A small, shuddering breath. Then another. Jack let out a laugh, more of a rasp, really. Relief washed over him, heavier than the exhaustion threatening to pull him under. They were alive, for now. The storm still raged. The flood was still rising. But Jack Dawson wasn't going to let them drown. Not tonight, not ever. Jack Dawson's chest rose and fell in ragged gasps as he lay sprawled on the half-submerged barn roof. The freezing rain lashed against his skin, the wind howling through the skeletal remains of the structure. The floodwaters stretched endlessly around them, swallowing roads, fences, and trees, turning the familiar countryside into an unforgiving ocean of debris. Beside him, the mother dog curled around her puppies, her drenched golden fur plastered against their tiny bodies in a desperate attempt to keep them warm. The smallest pup, the one Jack had pulled from beneath the surface, let out a weak whimper. It was still breathing, but barely. Jack ran a hand over his face, trying to shake the exhaustion clawing at him. He was soaked to the bone, his ribs throbbing from the earlier blow, and his limbs felt like lead. But stopping wasn't an option, not when the water was still rising. They weren't safe, not yet. He forced himself upright, scanning their surroundings. The barn's tin roof was slick with rain, but it was sturdy, at least for now. Below them, the flood churned violently, carrying pieces of broken homes, tree branches, and even the occasional drowned animal past. He needed a plan. The mother dog lifted her head, watching him with wary, intelligent eyes. She had trusted him enough to let him pull her and her pups from the river, but now that they were out of immediate danger, he could see hesitation creeping in. She still wasn't sure of him. Jack exhaled, reaching out slowly. She tensed, but didn't move as he ran a hand over her soaked fur. "You did good, girl," he murmured, his voice rough from the cold. "But we're not out of this yet." She let out a soft huff, nuzzling one of her pups closer. Jack looked back at the water. It was still rising inch by inch, creeping closer to the barn roof. If it reached them before help arrived, there would be nowhere left to go, and he wasn't about to sit here and wait to drown. He needed to figure out a way to get them to higher ground. Jack's mind raced. The town's main road ran west of here. If the water hadn't swallowed it completely, it might still be passable. The problem was, it was at least half a mile away, and he had no boat, no rope, nothing but his own strength. And after everything he had already endured, he wasn't sure how much of that he had left. He clenched his jaw. It didn't matter. He had gotten them this far. He wasn't going to stop now. The wind shifted suddenly, and Jack caught movement in the distance, a dark shape against the floodwaters. He narrowed his eyes, trying to focus. A house, or at least what was left of one. It was a single-story farmhouse, half submerged but still standing, with part of its roof above water. It was higher than the barn, and it might be their only chance. Jack turned to the mother dog. "We have to move." She let out a low whine, ears flattening against her head. Jack hesitated. She was exhausted. They all were. And if she refused to go, he didn't know if he could carry her and all the pups across that much open water. But staying here meant death. Jack took a deep breath, rolling his shoulders. "I know you don't trust me," he said softly, meeting her eyes. "But I swear, I'm not leaving you behind." The mother dog stared at him for a long moment, rain dripping from her muzzle. Then, slowly, she nudged one of the puppies toward him. Jack let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He scooped up the smallest pup, tucking it securely into the front of his soaked jacket. The others followed, weakly squirming against him as he bundled them as best he could. Now for her. Jack shifted carefully, inching toward the edge of the roof. The water below was relentless, swirling with debris. He had to time this right. He braced himself, tightening his grip on the puppies. "Come on, girl," he urged. "We do this together." The mother dog hesitated. Then, with a burst of energy he hadn't expected, she leapt into the water beside him. Jack didn't waste another second. He plunged in after her. The cold was immediate, a brutal shock that stole the breath from his lungs. The puppies squirmed weakly against him, but he held them tighter, keeping their tiny heads above the surface as he kicked forward. The current fought him with every stroke, threatening to pull him under, to rip the pups from his arms. But he didn't stop. He kept his eyes locked on the farmhouse. One stroke, another. His muscles screamed and his ribs burned. Halfway, a floating tree branch slammed into his shoulder, nearly spinning him sideways, but he grit his teeth and pushed through it. The mother dog swam beside him, struggling but determined, her eyes flicking toward him as if taking cues from his movements. Closer. The farmhouse loomed before them, just a few feet away now. One more push. Jack reached out, his fingers catching the edge of the roof. His grip almost slipped, rain and exhaustion making it impossible to hold on. But he growled, forcing his fingers to lock around the wood. With a final agonizing heave, he hoisted himself up, dragging the puppies onto the slanted surface. His arms shook violently, but he didn't let go until all of them were safely on top. The mother dog struggled, her paws slipping against the wet wood. Jack didn't think. He reached down, grabbing her by the scruff and hauling her up beside him. And then, finally, he collapsed. He lay there, chest heaving, the rain still falling in merciless torrents. But they had made it. The water hadn't won. Not yet. The puppies stirred against him, letting out soft, exhausted whimpers. The mother dog, shivering, curled around them, pressing her body close to his, as if acknowledging the fight they had just won together. Jack let out a breath, running a shaking hand through his soaked hair. They had bought themselves a little more time. But the flood wasn't over, and the fight for survival had only just begun. Jack Dawson sat motionless on the slanted, rain-slicked roof of the half-submerged farmhouse, his back pressed against the cold, unforgiving wood. His breaths came slow and shallow, steam rising from his lips as the storm continued to rage. The floodwaters churned beneath them, relentless and hungry, but for now they were safe, or as safe as one could be in the middle of a disaster. The puppies stirred against his chest, their tiny bodies trembling as they huddled close, seeking warmth. Jack instinctively tightened his grip around them, pulling his soaked jacket higher to shield them from the cold. Beside him, the mother dog curled around the rest of her litter, her golden fur matted and filthy, but her tongue moving tirelessly, licking each pup, checking them, making sure they were still alive. She had not yet relaxed. Neither had he. Jack's pulse still thundered in his ears, but it wasn't just from the exertion of the rescue. Something deeper, something raw and buried was clawing its way to the surface. This wasn't the first time he had been trapped in a flood, and it wasn't the first time someone had depended on him to save them. His fingers dug into the soaked fabric of his jeans, muscles tensing as the past unspooled in his mind, unbidden, unwelcome. It had been 4 years ago, a night just like this one. The call had come in around midnight. A family trapped in their car, husband, wife, and their 5-year-old son. The water had risen faster than anyone had predicted, swallowing roads, cutting off escape routes. By the time Jack and his partner Ethan Carter had arrived, the car had already been half submerged, the headlights flickering weakly through the torrent. He remembered the look on the mother's face. Pure, unfiltered terror. They had waded in immediately, pushing through the current, fighting against debris. Ethan had reached the car first, smashing the window to unlock the doors. Jack had taken the boy, barely conscious, his lips tinged blue. The mother had reached for him, screaming her son's name as he was pulled from her grasp. But then, the worst sound Jack had ever heard. A crack, not of glass, not of metal, of the ground beneath them. The pavement gave way. The car lurched violently, the rear end tipping downward as the flood swallowed it whole. Ethan was still inside. Jack had lunged, reaching for him, but gone, just like that. The mother, the father, his partner, all three lost to the current before he could do a damn thing to stop it. They had found Ethan's body 3 days later, tangled in the remains of a barbed wire fence 2 miles downstream. Jack had never forgiven himself, and now he was here again, the same storm, the same flood, the same sinking feeling in his gut that told him this time wouldn't be any different. His hands clenched into fists. No, not again. His gaze dropped to the mother dog who was still licking the weakest pup, nudging it gently with her nose, urging it to respond. She hadn't given up, neither could he. Jack forced out a slow breath, his body stiff from the cold. His ribs throbbed with every inhale, his limbs ached, but the weight of the puppies against him reminded him that he couldn't afford to shut down now. He wasn't trapped in the past. He was here. He had a chance to save them. The mother dog looked up at him suddenly, her amber eyes locking onto his, filled with something he couldn't quite place. A question, a challenge. Jack swallowed, lifting a trembling hand to scratch behind her ear. "I'm not leaving you," he murmured. "Not this time." She blinked slowly, then let out a quiet sigh, resting her head against her pups. The moment passed, but the ghosts remained. Jack turned his gaze back to the water, scanning the distance. The farmhouse roof was holding, but for how much longer? The rain hadn't stopped, and the flood showed no signs of receding. They needed a way out. Somewhere in the distance, a faint rumble echoed through the storm. Helicopters, boats, rescue teams. Hope flickered in his chest, but he didn't let it settle. If there was anything the past had taught him, it was that help didn't always come in time, and Jack wasn't going to risk waiting to find out. He shifted slightly, adjusting his grip on the puppies. His body protested every movement, but he ignored it. There was work to do, because this time he wasn't going to fail. Morning arrived, but it brought no relief. The sky remained a swirling mass of grey, the rain continuing in a relentless drizzle. The flood water stretched as far as the eye could see, a murky expanse of destruction swallowing the land piece by piece. Jack Dawson shifted against the roof, muscles stiff and aching, his breath visible in the cold morning air. They had survived the night, but survival wasn't guaranteed for much longer. The farmhouse beneath them groaned under the pressure of the rising water, the structure barely holding. Jack could feel the subtle movements beneath him, the shifting, the creaking, the way the flood lapped at the edges of the roof like a predator circling its prey. It wouldn't last. If they didn't leave soon, they would be swallowed whole. Jack's gaze flicked to the mother dog. She was curled around her pups, her golden fur still damp, eyes half-lidded with exhaustion. But even in her weakened state, there was no mistaking the fire in her gaze. She wasn't giving up, and neither was he. Jack exhaled sharply and forced himself to his feet, his soaked clothes clinging uncomfortably to his skin. His ribs still ached from the earlier impact, his body begging for rest, but rest was a luxury they couldn't afford. He needed a plan. Rescue teams had yet to arrive, if they were even coming, and with no way of knowing how much longer the farmhouse would hold, waiting wasn't an option. He scanned the water, searching for anything that could help. There. A small rise in the land, barely visible above the waterline, about 1/4 of a mile away. It wasn't much, but it was higher ground. A chance. Jack clenched his jaw. 1/4 of a mile. With the floodwaters moving as fast as they were, that might as well have been a marathon. But what choice did they have? His gaze dropped to the puppies, still huddled together, their tiny bodies trembling from the cold. He had kept them alive this long. He wasn't about to let them die now. Jack reached down, testing his bootlaces before an idea clicked into place. They needed to stay together, and he needed his hands free to swim. His mind worked quickly, scanning his surroundings for anything he could use. His eyes landed on a length of twisted fencing, tangled in debris near the roof's edge. Not ideal, but it would have to do. With stiff, aching fingers, Jack pried it free, careful to avoid the rusted barbs, then got to work. He stripped off the flannel shirt he had been wearing beneath his jacket, tearing it into long strips. He knotted the fabric tightly around the mother dog's chest and the puppies, fashioning crude slings to keep them secured against him. It wasn't perfect, but it would hold. Hopefully. The mother dog whined softly as he worked, her ears flicking nervously. "I know, girl," Jack murmured, tightening the makeshift harness. "It's not going to be fun, but it's the only way we make it out of this." She blinked up at him, exhaustion heavy in her eyes, but she didn't resist. "Good girl." Jack finished securing the last knot, double-checking the ties. The puppies nestled close against his chest, their tiny bodies warm, even through the soaked fabric. The mother dog stood beside him, tense but ready. Jack took a slow breath, rolling his shoulders. This was going to be hell. He reached down, tightening his bootlaces one last time, then turned toward the water. "All right," he muttered. "Time to move." He stepped off the roof. The cold hit like a sledgehammer. The flood swallowed him instantly, stealing the air from his lungs. His body screamed in protest, but he fought through it, kicking hard, adjusting his grip to keep the dogs above the surface. The current was merciless, dragging at him with unseen hands, trying to pull him under. His muscles burned with every stroke, but he kept his focus locked on the patch of land ahead. One stroke, then another. He could do this. He had to. The mother dog paddled beside him, struggling against the water, but she stayed close. She trusted him now. That was the only reason this was even possible. 10 yards. 20. The land seemed impossibly far away. The weight of the puppies dragged at him, making every motion harder, slower. His limbs were lead, his breaths ragged. A log rushed past, barely missing them. The debris in the water was getting worse. Jack gritted his teeth, pushing harder. 50 yards. His vision blurred, his grip slipped. Not now. Not when they were so close. Another wave surged toward them, a powerful rush of water slamming against his chest, nearly knocking the air from his lungs. His fingers clutched the mother dog's sling, steadying her as she yelped in panic. "Keep moving." 75 yards. The shore was in sight. His strength was fading, but he had no choice but to keep going. The current grew stronger as they neared the land, a final, cruel attempt to rip them away at the last second. Jack dug deep, kicking hard, lungs screaming for air. The puppies squirmed against him, barely clinging to consciousness. The mother dog let out a sharp, desperate bark. One more stroke and one more. His hand slammed into solid ground. Jack nearly sobbed. With the last of his strength, he hauled himself up onto the muddy slope, dragging the mother dog and the puppies with him. His body collapsed, his lungs burned, but they had made it. The puppies trembled in his arms, whimpering softly, but they were alive. The mother dog staggered to her feet, shaking the water from her fur, then turned and nudged him with her nose, almost as if checking to see if he was still breathing. Jack let out a weak chuckle, running a hand through his dripping hair. "Yeah," he rasped. "I'm still here." The mother dog let out a small, exhausted huff and curled up beside her pups. Jack tilted his head toward the sky. The rain was still falling. The flood was still rising. But for the first time in hours, he let himself believe, just for a moment, that they might actually survive this. Jack's body ached with exhaustion, every muscle screaming for relief, but the flood refused to grant him even a moment's rest. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle, yet the water raged on, an unstoppable force carving its way through the land. The mother dog was barely standing, her legs trembling, but her eyes remained locked on her pups, as if willing herself to keep going for them. The puppies were cold, weak, and clinging to Jack's soaked jacket, their tiny bodies pressed against him for warmth. They had made it to this small patch of land, but it wasn't safe. The water was rising, creeping closer inch by inch. They needed a way out. Jack scanned the distance. A bridge. It was old, barely more than a rusting steel frame spanning the floodwaters. Parts of it were already submerged, and the middle section tilted dangerously, as if one more push from the current would send it collapsing. It wasn't a great option, but it was the only one they had. Jack took a breath, tightening the makeshift sling around the puppies. "All right, girl," he muttered to the mother dog, glancing down at her. "One last push." She let out a weak huff, ears twitching. She was exhausted, but she understood. They had to move. Jack waded into the water first, testing the depth. The current immediately grabbed at his legs, threatening to pull him under, but he adjusted his stance and pushed forward, step by agonizing step. The bridge was 100 yards away. The first 20 were manageable. His boots found some footing beneath the water, and the mother dog swam beside him, her movements sluggish but determined. But then the river turned violent. A surge of water slammed into them like a freight train, knocking Jack off balance. He twisted mid-fall, throwing his arms around the puppies as his back hit the water, the cold stealing his breath. The mother dog yelped as she was swept away, her head barely above the surface. "No!" Jack gasped, kicking hard, fighting to stay upright. The puppies squirmed against his chest, their tiny cries lost in the roar of the flood. He spotted the mother dog just ahead, struggling, her eyes filled with panic. Jack forced his exhausted body forward, reaching, stretching. His fingers brushed her fur, then a tree branch. A massive, broken limb barreling toward them with terrifying speed. Jack's heart slammed against his ribs. It was coming too fast, too heavy. If it hit them, it would either crush them or drag them under. And there was no time to react, no time to dodge, only time for one choice. Himself or them. Instinct kicked in. Jack twisted his body, shielding the puppies with his arms, pressing them tight against his chest. He didn't even have time to brace for impact. The branch struck. A sickening crack echoed through the air. Pain exploded through Jack's side. His grip faltered, his head snapped back, and for a moment the world went white with agony. The impact sent him spiraling, the force tearing his feet from whatever purchase they had found. The mother dog barked, but the sound faded as he was swept away, tumbling through the flood like a rag doll. He hit something hard, wood, the bridge. His body slammed into one of the half-submerged support beams, the air driven from his lungs. His arms burned, his grip on the puppies slipping. No, not now. Not them. Jack gritted his teeth, forcing his fingers to tighten, forcing his mind to stay clear. He wasn't losing them. He wouldn't. Summoning what little strength he had left, he kicked toward the bridge, reaching blindly. His hands caught the edge of a steel beam, rusted and slick, but solid. His fingers locked around it. He had them. They weren't gone. The current yanked at his legs, trying to rip him away, but Jack held on, his muscles screaming, his vision swimming. The mother dog, where was she? Jack's eyes darted through the water. There, just a few yards away, she was caught in the current, fighting with what little strength she had left. She wasn't going to make it to the bridge on her own. Jack didn't hesitate. Ignoring the pain, he extended one arm, reaching closer. She paddled, her golden fur barely visible against the dark water. Closer. Then their eyes met, and she pushed forward, one last desperate surge, launching herself toward him. Jack caught her, his fingers twisted into the fabric of her sling, yanking her upward with a guttural growl of effort. She scrambled, claws scraping against the metal beam as she clawed her way onto the bridge, collapsing beside him, panting. Jack barely had the energy to breathe. But they were alive. He turned, shifting his grip on the puppies, pressing them against his chest as his back sagged against the metal. The bridge trembled beneath them, groaning under the pressure of the flood. It wasn't going to last, but it had gotten them this far. Jack let out a breath, turning his head toward the mother dog. She was watching him, not with fear, not with uncertainty, with trust, real trust. Jack let out a weak chuckle, shaking his head. "You're a tough one, girl," he murmured. She let out a quiet whine, pressing her nose against his arm. Jack swallowed, his throat thick. They weren't out of the woods yet, but for the first time it felt like they had a real chance. Now they just had to find a way off this damn bridge. The world had shrunk to the rhythmic pounding of Jack's heartbeat and the endless roar of the floodwaters. Every muscle in his body burned, his vision blurred at the edges, but he refused to loosen his grip on the mother dog and her pups. The bridge trembled beneath them, metal groaning under the relentless force of the river. It wouldn't last much longer. Jack knew this was it. They had nowhere left to go. His breath came in shallow gasps as he scanned the horizon, his mind a fog of exhaustion and pain. The mother dog was lying beside him, too weak to move, but her chest still rose and fell. She was alive. The puppies nestled against his chest, their tiny bodies trembling, but they were still breathing. That had to be enough, but how much longer could they hold on? Then, a sound. Faint at first, barely cutting through the chaos of wind and water, but it was there, a distant mechanical hum. Jack's sluggish mind fought to process it. Then he saw it, a boat, a rescue boat. His pulse spiked. Through the mist and rain, he could just make out the orange life vests of the crew, the flashing light mounted at the bow. They were scanning the water, searching for survivors. Jack opened his mouth, but his voice barely came out. He swallowed hard, trying again. "Hey, over here!" The effort sent a sharp jolt of pain through his ribs, but he didn't care. He forced himself to his knees, waving an arm wildly. The boat turned. They had seen him. A surge of relief crashed over Jack, nearly buckling his already shaking limbs. He let out a ragged breath as the boat maneuvered closer, its motor fighting against the current. A man in a yellow raincoat leaned over the side, shouting, "We see you! Hold on, we're coming!" Jack didn't know if he nodded or if his body simply swayed forward from exhaustion, but he felt himself start to sink. The mother dog whined weakly beside him, and Jack clenched his jaw. No, not yet. The boat pulled alongside the bridge, the rescue team moving fast. 2 men reached for Jack, but he shook his head. "Take her first," he rasped, motioning toward the mother dog. The crew hesitated, but Jack's voice turned sharp despite his exhaustion. "Take the dog first." One of the men nodded and crouched low, wrapping his arms around the mother dog's soaked body. She let out a weak sound of protest but didn't resist as they hauled her into the boat. Jack exhaled shakily. The puppies were next. One by one, they were lifted from his arms, their tiny forms disappearing into the safety of the rescue team's jackets. The smallest one, barely breathing, was cradled carefully by a woman who immediately began rubbing warmth back into its fragile body. Finally, strong hands grabbed Jack's shoulders. "Got you!" someone grunted. Jack had no fight left. His body gave in as they pulled him aboard, his limbs too heavy to move, his breath coming in short, painful bursts. He collapsed onto the boat's floor, water pooling beneath him. Safe. They were safe. Jack barely registered the frantic voices around him, the blur of movement as the team checked him over, his vision dimmed, exhaustion threatening to drag him under. Then, a soft, trembling weight burrowed into his chest. Jack blinked. A puppy. The tiniest one, the same pup he had pulled from beneath the water, now curled up against his soaked jacket, shaking but alive. Jack swallowed hard, lifting a weak hand to run his fingers over its damp fur. It let out a soft whimper, then nuzzled closer. Something inside Jack cracked wide open. It wasn't just relief, it was something deeper, something he hadn't let himself feel in years, purpose. Jack had spent so long running, from his past, from his failures, from the weight of guilt that had told him he wasn't good enough, that he couldn't save anyone. But these tiny creatures, this mother dog who had fought just as hard as he had, they weren't just survivors, they were proof that sometimes the fight was worth it, proof that even in the worst storms there was still something worth saving. Jack let out a slow, unsteady breath, resting his head back against the boat's side. He had gone into that flood, thinking he was alone. But as he looked down at the little life curled against his heart, he realized something. He hadn't just saved them, they had saved him too. The floodwaters receded slowly, leaving behind a landscape of wreckage and renewal. Broken fences, uprooted trees, and waterlogged homes painted a picture of devastation. But for Jack Dawson, something else had emerged from the storm, something he never expected, a second chance. The mother dog and her puppies had survived, and now they were his. Jack stood on the front porch of his small cabin, gazing out at the sunlit yard where the mother dog, whom he had started calling Grace, lay in the grass, watching over her pups. They were stronger now, their tiny legs wobbly but determined as they explored their new world. One of them, a feisty little ball of golden fur, kept tripping over its own paws, rolling onto its back before scrambling up again. Jack huffed a quiet laugh. A month ago, he never would have imagined this. His once lonely home now filled with the chaotic joy of barking, playful growls, and the unmistakable warmth of companionship. But then again, he hadn't expected to survive the flood either, and yet here they were. He adjusted his stance. His ribs still sore from the bruising impact of the floating tree branch, but the pain was nothing compared to the weight he had been carrying for years. A weight that somehow felt lighter now. Jack hadn't just rescued them. They had pulled him from the flood too, not just the raging waters, but the one that had been drowning him on the inside. He crouched down as the smallest puppy, the one he had nearly lost, came bounding toward him, tail wagging furiously. Jack reached out, scratching behind its soft ears. "Your trouble," he murmured with a smirk. The puppy licked his hand enthusiastically before curling up against his leg, as if it had always belonged there. And maybe it had. Grace lifted her head, watching the exchange. There was trust in her eyes now, real trust. Jack wasn't just some stranger who had pulled them from the flood. He was their home now. He sighed, rubbing a hand through his hair. Well, guess that settles it. He had spent years running from his past, running from people, running from any attachments that might make him vulnerable again. But he wasn't running anymore. Jack glanced around at the mess in his yard. Paw prints in the mud, chewed-up sticks scattered across the porch, a tipped-over water bowl from one particularly enthusiastic puppy. It was chaos, and he wouldn't trade it for anything. With a final glance at the sky, clear, endless, free of storms, Jack sat down on the porch, letting the warm sun sink into his skin. For the first time in years, he wasn't waiting for the next disaster. He wasn't haunted by what he had lost, because for the first time, he had something to hold on to, a home, a family, and a future. The cabin had never felt like home before. Jack had bought it years ago, thinking solitude would give him peace, but the walls had only echoed with silence. Now, those same walls vibrated with the playful barks of puppies, the scuffle of tiny paws on wooden floors, and the occasional deep sigh from Grace as she tried, often unsuccessfully, to keep her energetic litter under control. Jack leaned against the porch railing, watching as the pups tumbled over each other in the grass. The smallest one, the one he had nearly lost, was chasing a butterfly, tripping over its own paws but never giving up. A smile tugged at the corners of Jack's lips. "Determined little thing," he muttered. Grace, lying beside him, lifted her head and gave a slow wag of her tail, as if agreeing. Jack had officially adopted them all. At first he had thought about finding them homes. After all, what did he know about raising puppies? But every time he looked into their eyes, every time one of them curled up beside him after a long day, he knew the truth. They weren't going anywhere, and neither was he. A new routine. Morning started early now. Jack would wake to the sound of tiny paws scampering across the hardwood floor, eager yips demanding breakfast. Grace would trot beside him as he prepared their meals, her eyes watchful, protective, always making sure he did it right. After breakfast, they ran through the fields behind the cabin, the puppies discovering new adventures every day, chasing birds, rolling in the dirt, wrestling each other into exhausted heaps. Jack found himself laughing more than he had in years. The weight in his chest, the guilt, the regret, the pain, was still there. But it didn't consume him anymore, because every time he looked at Grace, at her pups, at the life they were building together, he was reminded of something he had forgotten long ago. Saving a life didn't just mean pulling someone from danger. It meant giving them something to live for, and in doing so, they had given that back to him too. The visitors. One afternoon, a truck rumbled down the dirt road leading to Jack's cabin. The rescue team. Jack recognized the man in the yellow raincoat, Tom, one of the guys who had pulled him from the flood. He stepped out, his boots crunching against the gravel, a slow smile spreading across his face as he spotted the dogs. "Well, I'll be damned," Tom chuckled, resting a hand on his hip. "Looks like you didn't just save 'em. You built yourself a pack." Jack smirked. "Something like that." Tom knelt down as the puppies rushed to greet him, wagging their tails furiously. "We wanted to check in," he said, scratching one behind the ears. "See how you were doing." Jack hesitated. For so long he had avoided conversations like this, people asking if he was okay, if he needed anything. But as he glanced back at Grace, watching her pups with that same unwavering devotion, he realized something. He wasn't alone anymore. He nodded. "I'm good, Tom, really." Tom studied him for a long moment, then gave a small nod. "Glad to hear it." Before he left, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small badge. "By the way," he said, handing it over, "the local rescue team's always looking for good people. We figured, if you ever wanted to help again, well, you know where to find us." Jack stared at the badge, running his thumb over the raised letters. It wasn't a police badge. It wasn't a symbol of the past he had walked away from. It was something new. A chance. A choice. Jack looked back at the dogs, then at the land stretching out before him, the home he had built without realizing it. Maybe he wasn't done saving lives after all. Maybe this was just the beginning. The final sunset. That evening, Jack sat on the porch, a cold beer in one hand, the smallest puppy curled up against his chest. The others were sprawled out beside him, Grace keeping a watchful eye on her brood. The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. For the first time in years, Jack wasn't looking for the storm. He wasn't waiting for the next disaster. He was here now, living a life he never thought he'd have. And for once, that was enough. He took a slow breath, running a hand over the sleeping pup's fur. "Welcome home, kid," he murmured. And for the first time, he truly believed it. Jack's story isn't just about survival. It's about second chances, about finding hope when all seems lost, and about how sometimes the ones we save end up saving us. This mother dog and her puppies didn't just make it through the storm. They found a home. They found love. And in the process, they gave Jack something he never thought he'd have again, a reason to keep going. Life has a way of bringing us the family we need, even when we least expect it. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments. Have you ever experienced a moment where an animal changed your life? We'd love to hear your story. And if you believe in second chances, in love that defies the odds, and in the unbreakable bond between humans and animals, please share this story. Let's spread hope, kindness, and the reminder that no matter how strong the storm, there's always a light waiting on the other side. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story of courage, love, and redemption. Because sometimes the greatest rescues happen when we least expect them.